Hi friends, I'm back. I've given a lot of thought to the content of this particular video and what I wanted to talk about. What I've come up with is I want to talk about out-of-hospital DNRs and the things that need to be considered as one makes a decision to become Do Not Resuscitate. And as we've talked about in other videos, it is not a decision to be made lightly, whether to be resuscitated and have a code or to not be resuscitated and have a code. It's really something that requires a lot of thought and an informed decision process. But before we go into that, I want to tell you a story about my car. So back in January of 2005, I bought a brand new Honda CR-V, and it was amazing. That car was up and down the road with me on all the highways of Oklahoma, back and forth from San Antonio to Missouri a couple of times when I was in residency and took leave. It's driven the Gulf Coast to go to Mississippi with me and be there. It's driven through the nothingness of West Texas at least twice. And it has been so low maintenance that it's been amazing. I changed the oil, I took care of it, made sure it had tires, did a tune-up. But really, the overall investment in this car after I bought it has been pretty minimal. Somewhere around year 8, while I was in Mississippi, I had to replace the air conditioner compressor. And I suspect that was because in Mississippi, you can't have the heat running and not have the air conditioner running at the same time because the humidity there just makes any warm air piped into the car just feel like wet sponge. And so for the entire time I was in Mississippi, which was about 2.5 years, I was running the air compressor and the heater at the same time. And I think that just took a toll on the air compressor. So that was a pretty big expense, but worth it because this car was really going. Here in the last year, I'd say since October last year, she started to cost me more money. So in October, I had to replace the alternator and the starter at the same time to the tune of $1,800. And then in February, I bought a new car so I could gift this one to the kid because she's going to be learning to drive this summer and will need something to drive. So I did a little more work on her and replaced the shocks and the struts to the tune of about $1,500. So now this car is 16 years old and she's cost me over $3,000 in less than a year's time, which is kind of what you expect. As a car gets older, you expect more upkeep, right? Now, this is in no way to say that people are like cars, but if you look at the nature of healthcare and you look at who gets the most healthcare, it is our older adults. And as any of us who are in our 40s recognize, we see the doctor more now and more regularly than we did when we were 20. We look at our parents and our grandparents. They saw the doctor more regularly at their age than we ever do in our 40s. So there's a lot of similarities between the upkeep needed to keep an older car running and the number of visits and things that are required to keep an older adult running healthily. So having said that, let's talk about what I do for a living. I'm trained in internal medicine, which means I am in medicine designed to take care of grown-ups. I don't take care of children. I went on to do fellowship training in geriatrics. That level of training is designed to take care of adults who are age 65 and older. Sometimes I end up taking care of people in the geriatrics clinic who are younger than 65 but have a lot of things wrong with them that makes them sick enough to be in the geri clinic. By the nature of the age group I take care of, I am taking care of older, sicker adults than a normal internal medicine practice would see on a day-to-day basis, right? I get the oldest and the sickest. Additionally, I am trained in palliative medicine, which means I can be taking care of a 20-year-old up to a 90-year-old who has a life-limiting illness, meaning these are going to be patients also, regardless of their age, who are super sick. They have medical conditions that will cause them to either die before they would be expected to ordinarily, or that have medical conditions that require a lot of doctor's appointments and have a lot of symptoms that interfere with their quality of life. So, having said that, it is worth mentioning that I am biased about an out-of-hospital DNR, right? I see the sickest and I see the toll that can take. So let's talk about the out-of-hospital DNR. In previous videos, we talked about how when you sign an out-of-hospital DNR, that would mean that if your heart stopped and you quit breathing, nature would take its course and you would be allowed to die peacefully. There's the American Heart Association, who runs the training programs for both basic life support training, which is just CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, as well as advanced cardio life support, which is the training doctors get to not only do the BLS stuff, pressing on a chest and breathing for somebody, but also the drugs and the EKG interpretation and all of the things that go with a major event like cardiac arrest. The American Heart Association, called the AHA, has something I saw last weekend on their website that says 45% of people who get CPR with a cardiac arrest survive to go to the hospital. So I got curious about that, and I started digging around in the research databases to find out what kind of journal articles are being published about people after they have a heart attack. And I found a study published in a journal called Critical Care. It was published in, hold on, let me find it. I think it was October of last year. I'm not finding it. I can't believe it. I thought I was prepared. Anyway, it's a new article, and this is a meta-analysis, meaning that the authors of this paper pulled research studies and aggregated data from many, many other database sources and in many other papers. And they looked at information and studies from the 1970s, I believe, up into about 2019. So about a year before this paper was published. And here's what they found. Okay, so before I start giving you that information, let's talk about the realities of CPR. In the world of television, in the world of ER and what was the other TV show that was on around the same time? Chicago Hope. Every time they had somebody code on the show, that person came back to life. That was with 70 to 80%, resuscitation, and they lived happily ever after, right? Because everybody knows that if there was not some amount of fiction in these shows, nobody would watch them and they would not be enjoyable. So let's say that these shows were filmed and were done in such a way that the data in this paper was what happened on TV, okay? So if ER happened the way this paper did, only about 3 out of 10 people would get a return of spontaneous circulation, meaning that after CPR, out in the field, out at the grocery store, or wherever they went down, after having the CPR, only 3 out of 10 people would have their heart beating normally again, okay? Also, only 2 or so, maybe a quarter of those people who went down out of those 10 would make it into the hospital, okay? That means survive to admission. Once people are into the hospital, those numbers get worse and worse, okay? So this study showed that about 10% of people who are admitted after a cardiac arrest survive to discharge. Specifically in North America, it's about 7-8%. Then there's another criteria about survival for the 30 days after discharge, and that number is not great either. It is, where did I put it? About 8%, I think. And then 1 year survival after discharge is about 7-8% also. What is not available in this study to talk about is how old the patients were, because they took all age groups. So I don't know if the 7% who survived to 1 year were all in their 30s, or if it was a mix of people from the age of 20 all the way up to 80, right? It also doesn't allow me to know what the quality of life these people had after they left the hospital. And that's the big important part that we need to talk about today. And this is not my own experience. This is not just because I take care of the oldest and the sickest. This is pretty universally accepted. People who have sudden cardiac death, who are in their 30s and their 40s, it is an unfortunate event. Happily, it's exceedingly rare. And generally those people can leave the hospital, get some rehab to get strong again, and can come back to their normal life. People who have a sudden cardiac death in the hospital or out of the hospital, if they are, let's say, over the age of 70, definitely over the age of 75, typically have a very diminished return to their life, meaning that they either do not go back to playing golf at all because they don't have the stamina now to walk the golf course and they have to ride the golf course, or if they were now riding to go golfing, they may not be able to golf at all because they don't even have the stamina to drive the cart. Or they may be no longer able to live alone, they may be living in a nursing home. So this decision to be full code is not without its consequences. And a 75 or 80-year-old person who has a coronary arrest and gets coded typically does not do well after that. They have a longer hospitalization, they will be in the ICU and typically have a longer ICU hospitalization before they can go to the wards, and then they come out of the wards and they go to generally a skilled nursing home where they get rehab. Nobody wants to go to a nursing home. A lot of them can leave the nursing home, but then have a very diminished ability to come back to their quality of life. And so what I often hear is that the phrase, my mother wants to be full code because she's a fighter and she's been through so many things, she can get through a code too. The reality is, having a heart attack and dying at the age of 75, 80, 85 is a normal part of life. At 75 or 80, let's just say 85, because people are living into their late 70s and early 80s now. By the time someone is 80 or 85, they're basically having the kind of life that I'm struggling with my old car. I'm having to replace the alternator. I'm having to replace the starter. I'm having to replace the shocks and the struts. People who are in their 80s and 85 years old, when their heart stops, that's the equivalent of the motor failing, right? And when a motor fails in a car, you don't get it going again and ever have the car function the same again. And an 80-year-old who dies and we're able to resuscitate and bring them back, they don't ever function the same again. And so I would argue, if a person is to the point in life where they're needing to make a decision about their code status, that taking a very hard look at their current functional status, how are they getting along in their day-to-day lives, is going to tell you volumes about how they will do after a code. An 80-year-old who is very functional and who is able to still drive to the grocery store, she's still cooking dinner for herself and her husband, maybe she's still functional to the point where she's managing her own medicines and having no trouble taking those, she's doing her own bills and maybe even able to pay her own taxes, and is so savvy that she's got a computer now and she's running a family website, right? She's very, very functional, and she will not do great after a code, but she is going to fare better after she's been coded than her peer who maybe can no longer drive to the grocery store and needs assistance to get her groceries purchased and is needing someone to bring in food for her and is forgetting how to manage her medicines. Certainly, the first 80-year-old lady is going to do better than one who has already had maybe some major health problems, maybe a hip fracture, and is now living in a nursing facility because she's needing rehab and has never been able to go on home, right? And so those are two completely different pictures, and those are two completely different people of who I see making decisions about their code status. And the first lady, who is so incredibly functional, she still gives me a little heartburn when she tells me she wants to be full code, but she doesn't give me as much heartburn as the lady or the family of the lady who is now having trouble managing her own medicines or is now living in the nursing home. So all of that is to say, as we get older, one of the natural outcomes of being alive is eventually dying. We are not permanent. We're not immortal. Okay, it's hard to believe. I still feel immortal most days of the week. But we become less and less mortal as our lives get longer. So as we start talking to our loved ones about the advance directive and medical powers of attorney and what they would want for their care if they became sicker, it's worth talking about the functional status of this person and how well they would do with a code. if you have questions about that, please reach out to me. You can either privately message me or you can put it on the Facebook page, whatever. I'm happy to have that conversation with each of you individually, but these are things to think about as you have these conversations with your family members. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.